There's a feeling I remember having as a kid when it was Christmas, when presents started to appear under the Christmas tree. That giddy feeling of overwhelming excitement, of pure glee, of sheer joy and anticipation. After all these years, I almost forgot what that feeling was like. Until now, literally until now, until the day I laid my hands on this keyboard and played it for the very first time. I know we talk about dream synths, and they tend to be instruments that are so rare and so expensive that they will always be out of our reach. And when we talk about analog polyphonic dream synths, then there are a few. There's the mighty Korg PS3000 range, there's the incredible Yamaha CS80, and then there's the glorious sounding but temperamental Memory Moog from Bob Moog. Those are dream synths that are incredibly rare, that are incredibly expensive. And then there is this one. "16 voices of polyphony. Each voice has 2 voltage-controlled oscillators, 2 voltage-controlled filters, 3 complex multi-stage envelope generators, 3 low-frequency oscillators, 16-part multi-timbral. Each part has an arpeggiator and a sequencer, total control over stacks and splits. But the best part is the modulation matrix, 79 modulation sources, 175 modulation destinations. The Andromeda really is a modular analog polysynth." Right, so let's take a look at the overall architecture of this synthesizer. What we can see on the front panel is just going to be a very brief overview. Let's start off with the oscillator section. We have 2 oscillators here, these little clusters of controls for the oscillators and for the filters. I really do like it actually. It's very logically laid out for me. So we have 2 voltage controlled oscillators. This is an analog polysynth. Voltage controlled oscillators, they are identical. We've got a choice of 4 waveforms. We've got square wave, sawtooth, triangle and sine. We've got pulse width modulation capability, we've got hard and soft sync capability, and we've got tons and tons of modulation capabilities. We'll talk about modulations later on. So we've got our two voltage controlled oscillators. Now what they do is they feed through into a pre-filter mixer section. So this is an analog mixer here where we can blend the output from our oscillator number 1 and our oscillator number 2. Both these oscillators have a dedicated sub-oscillator. So these little controls here are for blending in the subs for each of the oscillators. And as well as those, we can blend in ring mod and noise. Well, not just noise, we can also blend in filter feedback. So we can actually take a feedback loop from the filters and back through again. That's with this little button here. And we can also take external audio input and blend that into this pre-filter mixer. So we've got our analog oscillators going through our analog mixer stage and then into our analog filters. Now here we have two filters, a state variable filter, a voltage control filter, and a low pass voltage control filter. Filter number 1, it's 12 dB, as you'd expect from a state variable filter. As two-pole filter, we have got low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch. And the second filter is a low pass filter, self-resonating 24 dB 4-pole filter. We can operate these filters in series or in parallel, and the routings through these filters are very flexible. The outputs can be selectively mixed together in another analog mixer section, this post filter mixer section here. We can take the low pass component, the high pass component, and the band pass component from filter number 1 and blend them how we like. And if you're wondering where is the control for notch, well, that is low pass and high pass together. We can also take the output from filter number 2, so that's our low pass from filter number 2 here. And then we have another control here which is able to selectively take signals before the filter section. Pre-filter blending control here. We can take the sine waves from oscillators 1 and or 2 and the ring mod as well. It's interesting that on the CS80 that you had the ability to blend in a sine wave after the filter section, and that's kind of what you've got here actually with both of these oscillators with the Andromeda. So analog oscillators through analog mixer, through analog filters, through another analog filter, and then the signal path goes to the amplifier section. Now, like on most synthesizers, there's nothing to write home about the amplifier section. There's just a couple of controls. Way over here on the right hand side, we've got a level control and we've got a dedicated pan control because the Andromeda is a stereo output synthesizer. We've also got the ability to route the output for our voice here, for our preset that we're creating. We can route it through some dedicated aux outputs on the back of the synth or through the main outputs. And if we go through the main outputs, then we've got the ability to also blend in some effects. Now there's a bit of a sort of like an idea on the internet that maybe the main outputs are not great, that we should go through the aux section because the main outputs must surely be digital because there are digital effects in the Andromeda. We'll talk about the effects later on. They are very comprehensive and quite ahead of their time, I believe. But actually the effects section is an analog effects section and a digital effects section, and you don't have to go through the digital effects if you don't want to. So we'll come on to the effects later on, but I think what I want to talk about next is the incredible modulation capabilities of this synthesizer. I held back from buying an Andromeda for many years, for way too many years, and for all the wrong reasons. Swayed by comments on the internet, comments about its sound not being all it's cracked up to be, how it sounds thin, not enough bottom end, how it's totally overrated, it's difficult to program. Comments most likely from people who've never owned one, never played one. And then even worse, all the stories of bugs, of faults, of glitches, the bespoke chips that can never be replaced. It is a synth that will go wrong. It is going to go wrong, and then you'll be fucked. So, one of the things that makes the Andromeda such a standout analog polysynth is its modulation capabilities. So far we've just looked at oscillators, filters, mixer sections and amplifier section. Let's look at the modulation capabilities of this synth. We have 3 envelope generators over on the right hand side here. They are incredibly comprehensive envelope generators. They are multi-stage envelope generators. I can't even remember how many stages there are. Let me count them. Well, we have a delay stage, we have an attack stage, 2 decay stages, sustain stage, 2 release stages. So according to my maths, that's 7 stages. Depends on whether or not you treat the delay stage as a stage at all. 7 stages, very, very comprehensive. You can get some really comprehensive and complex shapes out of these envelope generators. They are loopable, and you can trigger them from a variety of ways. And when we get into the modulation, sort of like routings and modulation matrix, we'll talk about that triggering as well. So we have 3 envelope generators. By default, they're kind of hardwired or ready to use, if you like, with pitch modulation for envelope number 1, filter modulation for envelope number 2, and amplitude modulation for envelope number 3. But you don't have to use those routings at all. You can create whatever routings you like. So those are the envelope generators, 3 of them. And likewise, over here on the far left, we have LFOs. We have 3 LFOs. They are complex LFOs as well. There's a variety of waveforms. Let's go and just choose, say, number 2. So we have, in terms of shape, we've got square, which is obviously pulse. We can change the pulse width of our LFOs. We have saw, we have triangle, we have sine wave, we've got random, and we've got noise from our LFOs. So there's a lot going on there in terms of the LFOs. And as well as those 3 LFOs, we also have a sample and hold as a separate modulation source. So, the Andromeda is an analog polysynth. The signal path is analog oscillators, analog mixers, analog filters, analog amplifier section. We've even got some analog effects built in as well. But the whole control of the Andromeda is digital. These are digitally generated envelope generators, digitally generated LFOs and sample and hold, because at the end of the day, that's what is allowing us to have so much control over the audio signal path. We can do so much in terms of modulations. I'm just going to turn and look at the user manual because I can't remember. There are 79 modulation sources for the mod matrix, and there are 175 destinations, and according to the manual it says that's 13,825 possible new modulation paths. That's in addition to the standard kind of hardwired ones that are given to you for free, if you like. There's tons and tons and tons of modulation you can do with this. Now, how you apply modulations, and I'm going to talk about this user interface and the screen over and over again in this video because I just think it's just brilliant. But the way that you sort of choose modulations is there are all over the place these little buttons. So against each oscillator we have a mod 1, mod 2, mod 3 button, as you can see there and there. Same for the filter sections there and there. Same for the envelope generators there above each one. We've got 3 mod slots, if you like, for modulating those components. We've even got them, say, in the mixer section. So for every single potentiometer, there's a little mod button, and each mod button has got a little LED next to it. It's either going to be lit, like this one, or not. So every single one of these, even the sub-oscillator mixers, are modulatable destinations, so we can modulate these mixers. Over here, exactly the same thing. We've got modulate all over the place. We've got modulate on the LFOs, so the LFOs can be modulation destinations as well. It's just mind-blowing how many modulations we can do here. How many of those buttons are on the front panel? There are 45, according to the manual, 45 of these buttons. So let's have a look at them. So let's have a look at, say, filter number 2, for example. We have got 3 mod slots for modulating filter number 2. And you'll see immediately which ones are used and which ones aren't, as whether or not there's an LED lit. So if we just tap on this button for mod slot number 1, which we can see is lit, we come to this sort of screen here. So we've got filter number 2, and we're looking, you can see these little tabs along the bottom here. We're looking at mod slot number 1. It should be very sort of like straightforward. If you've ever done any programming in modulation matrices, we have a list of modulation sources, a list of modulation destinations, and then we have an amount. In fact, we have 2 amounts here. We have a modulation level, but we've also got an offset, so we can shift up or down, positively or negatively, the modulation signal that's coming from the mod source. So very, very comprehensive. So you can see there's just 2 modulation destinations. So that's because we've chosen filter number 2, and we're choosing its mod slots. So there are just 2 things about filter number 2 that you can modulate. If I were to click on, say, mod 1 button for oscillator number 2, we'd see a different list of modulation destinations. So the destinations are specific to the mod slot that you have chosen. If we were to choose filter 1 high pass potentiometer here and tap on it, well, we've just got the level. That's just, you know, that's the only thing that we can modulate, is that level. So you'll see that on the right hand side that the modulation destinations are specific to what you've tapped on, but the list of modulation sources will always be the same, and there are so many of them. I mean, I can't possibly start to describe them to you. There's just a ton of them, an absolute ton. You've even got MIDI CCs towards the end there. You see their envelopes. You can use the individual stages of the envelopes as a modulation source. So just the decay stage, or one of the decay stages, just the sustain stage, etc. It's just so much here. It is just mind-blowing what you've got here. Let's put it back to where it was, LFO number 2. So I know I fiddled around with LFO number 2 earlier. I changed it to a square wave instead of what it was before, which was a triangle. So let's just listen to this patch I've got going on here. Tons of effects on there. Let's just turn those off. So let's go to that modulation routing. LFO number 2 is the source, frequency is the destination, and let's fiddle around with that. Change the rate. Go back. And so for this filter, we have 3 mod slots where we can use it as a destination. So we've just used modulation number 1. Oh, if we want to turn it off, that we can just turn it off here. And as soon as we turn it off, the light goes off. We're not using it anymore. So that's a very easy, visual indication of what modulations are going on. Go to another mod slot and add another modulation. It's really, really very simple. To be honest, I think we run a risk with any synth we buy that's out of warranty. Any synth we buy where the original manufacturer doesn't exist anymore, where there aren't spare parts anymore, and there's no servicing anymore. We run that risk. We run that risk all the time when we buy used gear. But with the Andromeda, it's kind of the most important thing that's talked about on the internet. So I briefly mentioned before that the envelope generators can be triggered in a flexible way. So let's just tap on, say, envelope number 2 and look at how it's being triggered. Well, we can trigger it from all these different modulation sources. Quite bizarre. We can trigger it from the mod wheel, from the pitch wheel, from the ribbon. I haven't talked about this ribbon. It's brilliant. I'm really using it a lot. We can get the LFOs to trigger the envelopes how we like, or the sample and hold level, or the other envelopes can trigger the envelope. There's just a whole load of the sequencer. I haven't mentioned the sequencer. There's a sequencer on board as well as an arpeggiator. We can get those to trigger the envelopes. In fact, the arpeggiator and the sequencer can be triggered by other things as well. Just gobsmacking what we can do. Foot switch if we want to. The volume, the MIDI volume, whatever we're coming, MIDI signals. It's just, I don't know. I just find it, I am just speechless, actually, as to how brilliant this synthesizer is. So you've got complete flexibility of when you trigger envelopes. You've got complete flexibility of when you trigger the sequencer, or start it and stop it, the arpeggiator, etc. It's I don't know. I just run out of words to describe how incredible this really is. This is a wonderful preset. It's a factory preset bank 2, number 34. It's called Matrix Pad. Sounds like this. If you're wondering what that E is, it's not the EU symbol. It means it's being edited. I've actually turned down the effects on this patch. Believe it or not, it doesn't sound like it though. Anyway. The reason why we are listening to this pad sound as beautiful as it is because no conversation about modulations with the Andromeda is really complete without talking about this ribbon control here. I know I very, very briefly mentioned it. It is brilliant, and the fact that it's here means that you just start to use it. I mean, there are so few synthesizers that I've ever used that have got a ribbon controller. And it's just a great way of adding expression. And as you'd guess, with the Andromeda, there's a whole load that you can do with it. It is yet another modulation source that you can modulate so many things with, hundreds of things with. So with this particular patch that we're listening to here, you'll see that it's using both of the filters, and both of the filters have got 3 mod slots taken up with different modulations. So let's have a look at those. Mod number 3 here is actually the mod wheel. So it's going to turn down the frequency of this filter, and up here, there we are, it's actually going to increase the resonance of that filter. So with the mod wheel, this is the effect that we get. We're here to talk about the ribbon controller, and the ribbon controller is, first of all, for filter number 2, it is reducing the frequency, while at the same time it's slightly increasing the resonance. And on the filter number 1, it is slightly increasing the resonance and also reducing the filter. So we get this kind of effect. Now, it doesn't remember where you touched it by default. So if I go up here with it and let go. But of course, we can get it to remember where we last touched it. Now, obviously, as you're playing a lovely performance, it might be that your right hand comes free or your left hand comes free. Andromeda have got that covered. They've got a whole button here on the right and on the left. It does exactly the same thing, but it just applies memory to wherever we last touched the ribbon control. So if it wasn't enough that the Andromeda is a 16-voice polyphonic analog synthesizer, and if it wasn't enough that it has such deep, amazing modulation capabilities, well, there's one more trick that the Andromeda has up its sleeve, and that is multi-timbrality. Now, if you think of modern-day synthesizers, think of the most powerful analog polysynth that is available today. It's going to be the Moog 1, right? The Moog 1, it's a 16-voice polyphonic analog synthesizer, and it is also multi-timbral. It is 3-part multi-timbral. It has 3 completely separate synth engines inside it, which you can access at the same time. You can play 3 completely different presets at the same time. Now, obviously, you are reducing your polyphony when you do this, but it is an incredibly powerful feature. Now, the Andromeda, made 20 years before the Moog 1, is a 16-part multi-timbral synthesizer. You can play up to 16 different presets at the same time. You can layer them how you like, you can split them how you like, you can have overlapping regions across the keyboard, as complicated as you want it to be. Now, obviously, if you go with 16-part multi-timbrality with the Andromeda, then you're going to end up just being able to play one note at a time. It's a bit of an extreme example, but you've got everywhere in between, from 1 part through to 16. Now, the way that I like to use Andromeda is just with a couple of parts. I like to take a preset that I've created and then sort of like turn it into a wide stereo effect. Let me give you an example. I'm going to play this little pad here. Right. I've called it, it's very gentle. It's a very gentle pad. That's what I've called it. Now I'm going to go into mix mode. Now in mix mode, we are now in multi-timbral mode. Some synthesizers call it multi-mode, and you'll see that we've got 2 LEDs lit down here, and that means that we've just got 2 parts playing. We've got 8 of these buttons across here, so we can have 8, and then with shift we can have another 8. So you can see actually by the little labels underneath, we can be accessing up to 16 parts here. So we've got 2 LEDs lit. One of them's flashing. That's the one that we've selected. So with that one selected, I can change any of the controls here, and I'll be making a change to that one part. I flick to another part, make some more changes. It's really so simple and easy to do. So I've just got these 2 parts, and if we go to this program menu here, this program screen, we can see that for the first one, which is flashing, the level is about halfway, 50%, and the pan is -100. That means hard left. If I go to part number 2, you'll see similar level, but the pan is +100. That's hard right. So just by taking that one preset and applying it here inside this mix, we get a bigger, wider stereo sound like this. Now, if this was a digital synthesizer, then by doing this, there wouldn't be any difference. It wouldn't sound more stereo than the previous, just playing the single part on its own would. But because this is a analog synthesizer, because these are voltage-controlled oscillators, voltage-controlled filters, there is going to be very, very slight variation. And so that's why we're getting that bigger, more stereo sound. But we can go one stage further than that. If you see here on the screen, we have the ability to transpose each part however we like by a number of semitones, and also detune them by a number of cents. So let's do that. Let's take this second one and let's tune it up by, say, 9 or 10 cents. Let's go to part number 1, tune it down by 9 or 10 cents, and now we get an even bigger sound. Let's transpose this second one. 7 semitones up. Lovely. So that's a very basic and simple example of how to use the mix section. But if you want to go crazy and you want to go old school, and remembering that each of your parts in your 16-part multi-timbral setup has its own sequencer and own arpeggiator, then you can go back to the factory presets and play things like this. This truly is the most wonderful analog polysynth I have ever played, ever owned, ever programmed. I wish it will live forever. I should have bought one years ago. So I'm going to make the most of the time I have with it. I'm going to play it whenever I can. I'm going to program it whenever I can. I'm going to make sounds. I'm going to engross myself in its power and its beauty. It honestly is a magnificent instrument, a powerful and ingenious invention. It is the Alesis Andromeda A6.